Thank you, everyone. Good morning. It's with great pleasure that I introduce today the panel for the discussion on mental health and loneliness. I'll start with our special guest here on my right, Dr. Alec Pembleton. Dr. Pembleton is a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist and a systemic family psychotherapist at the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Team, which is also known as CAMS. Some of you may know. He works for the Cheshire and Wirral Partnership NHS Foundation Trust in Chester. On the far right is Dr. Giovanna Moretto. Dr. Moretto is a principal clinical psychologist who also works for the Cheshire and Wirral Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, and she's a colleague of Dr. Pembleton. And last but not least, Dr. Martin O'Sullivan in the middle. He is a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist and works for the Temple Street Pediatric Hospital, which is part of Children's Health Ireland in Dublin. So welcome, the three of you. Today, the world seems to be much more attuned to mental health issues. And I'm sure you would all agree with me that we all know a little bit about mental health, or we think we know. And the knowledge on mental health is vast and widespread. It's absolutely everywhere. But despite these advancements, there is growing concern that children and young people are less resilient and ever more prone to struggling with challenges of life. And the theme of loneliness seems to be amongst them. So from our perspective, and I say from our perspective because in these 2 days we have been seeing loneliness in different perspectives, but from the mental health perspective, the relationship between loneliness and physical illness is a complex issue, and from our experience, requires a comprehensive approach to health and mental health together. Addressing loneliness involves understanding its physiological and psychological effects, but also encouraging social connections and building resilient individuals, which we are hopeful that by building resilient individuals, we may then build a resilient community too. So our guests will convey some stories they have encountered with their patients and young patients, student patients, or families too, and discuss the impact these stories have on them as therapists. So the panel will aim to explore questions such as what feelings are triggered in therapists when encountering loneliness in patients, the psychological meaning of feeling lonely, whether it reflects life in current society, and what patients may be seeking in their relationship with therapists. So I'm going to be asking two questions today to our guests. One question now, which is a sort of a variety of little elements to it, and it is what it means to feel lonely in the fields of psychology, psychotherapy, and psychiatry. What is the relationship between loneliness and illness and mental illness? And is lonely experienced by young people differently from the felt at other stages of life? So I would like to start with Martin. Martin, tell us your thoughts. I'm sure you have a lot more to say too than just that.
Thank you, Giselle. It's wonderful to be back here at Convergence. It's a lovely weekend and punctuated with some amazing moments that, catch you by surprise. I'm thinking particularly of the musical interlude yesterday evening. It was such a privilege to be there and to share, that work, that body of work that was done by so many people last night, but particularly Command Ming, who did a wonderful job. So we're talking today about loneliness and hopelessness, and to some extent that's easy because we're used to framing the challenges that young people have in our clinical work. We're all clinicians. But the tagline today, "Is there a hope that does not disappoint?" is a kind of novel one and an arresting one, and it, I think, asks more of us and brings us away from familiar clinical contexts and maybe into the further reaches of what's possible in therapy. First, I always like to acknowledge the young people that we work with and their families. I just have in mind a young patient of mine who is autistic and has a serious physical illness. And recently, she was struggling in school, and recently she was asked to move classes. But by moving classes, she lost contact with her only friend. And even though the new class was much more suited to her educationally, she just couldn't make the transition. She just couldn't make the transition. And it just was another reminder of how important friendship is and how highly we value friendship at all ages of life, I would say. So Britain has had a leading role in highlighting the importance of loneliness as a social phenomenon today. There was a parliamentary commission on loneliness established by the MP Jo Cox shortly before her terrible death in 2016. And her friend Rachel Reeves then, continued the work of the commission, and it was a cross-party endeavour. And following the publication of its final report, the UK government, which was then under Mrs. Theresa May, became the first in the world to publish a loneliness reduction strategy. And that example has had a ripple effect around the world, and the World Health Organization, in turn, has recognized the serious impact that loneliness and social isolation has on our physical and mental health across all ages and global regions. And they now have a commission on social connection, which is due to report next year, which aims to have loneliness and social isolation recognized and made a global public health priority, which is fantastic. The cultural historian Faye Bound Alberti, who was a professor of modern history at King's College in London, in her 2019 biography of loneliness, The History of an Emotion, invites us to try to understand how loneliness can be prevalent today, but rare 2 centuries ago. So she describes loneliness as an internalized sense of discomfort defined by lack. She argues that it emerged around 1800 as a feeling and a way to talk about that feeling because of a distinct set of social, political, medical, philosophical, and economic changes. So she describes loneliness as a modern social affliction that has grown up in the cracks in the formation of a society that's less inclusive and communal and more grounded in the scientific, medicalized idea of an individual set against the rest. Loneliness thrives, she writes, when there is a disconnect between the individual and the world, a disconnect particularly characteristic of neoliberal political systems, in her view. She suggests that we need to read loneliness like obesity as a perceived disease of civilization, a condition that is chronic, pathological, and associated with the way we live today. And what about children and young people? Because children are rarely physically alone, being surrounded by other children, family members, or teachers, the concept of a child or young person feeling lonely is not something that we immediately think about. And for this reason, surveys that demonstrate that actually children do report a lot of loneliness. And there was a notable survey from the Office of National Statistics here in the UK, which reported that the loneliest age group of all across the lifespan were those aged 16 to 24. So clearly, loneliness is not just about physical social isolation, it's also about how we experience our connection with other people. So what would underpin then the changes in the last 200 years as referenced by Alberti? I think the work of Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who's a retired British psychiatrist who has made his life's work the study of the brain's hemisphere, is very helpful. Now, he's an interesting man. I really recommend people looking him up and learning more about him. He read English literature here at Oxford. He then became a prize fellow at All Souls. I understand that's a big deal. I don't know, but people tell me that's a big deal. Apparently you get 7 years to just think in a room somewhere, and they pay you to do that, which sounds great. So his kind of magnum opus, the 2-volume The Matter with Things, is a single argument text. So he draws together neuropsychology, epistemology, and metaphysics. And he writes the brain's left hemisphere is designed to help us to apprehend the world and thus manipulate it, whereas the right hemisphere is there to comprehend it, see it for all that it is. And he suggests that our problem is that the very brain mechanisms which succeed in simplifying the world so as to subject it to our control militate against a true understanding of it. And I think his insights into the relationship between loneliness, hope, and the left-right brain dichotomy are really important. And if we consider, if we take his suggestion to recognize the limitations of a predominantly left brain orientated worldview, and by embracing holistic and integrative capacities of the right hemisphere, we can cultivate a deeper understanding of ourselves and develop strategies to enhance hope and connection.
Okay. Thank you everybody for making this early start today. Just a very tiny introduction. We are talking loneliness, but also hope. Me and Alec, this year, we have lost a very dear colleague and friend. So we experienced the loneliness of losing someone important in our life, professionally and humanly, but also, and it's the second bit, the hope that Alan, our dear friend, had brought in our life. So we thought to dedicate the work of these months and today to him. Since I started to prepare this talk, I started to ask more directly to my young people, do you feel alone? Not that it's something that we don't do normally, but as a psychologist, we tend to be a bit more gentle. But, because I was doing this work, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to do it more directly. To my surprise, I realized that my young people find much easier to reply to a question that I personally found much more difficult. That is, do you feel worthless? Do you feel that your life is worthless? That is a kind of a common question that we tend to use when we explore depression. That question is easier for them than say, are you alone? Than reply to, are you alone? And for me, it was quite very bitter discovery, because I got the impression that for them it's much easier to accept a general nihilist culture, yeah, it's fine that my life doesn't have a meaning. But, and that is the hope, it's still not acceptable to be alone. It's still too painful to feel lonely. And I believe, and that is also my attempt today, to see how feeling worthless and feeling alone are the same coin, are incredibly connected. There is millions of definitions of loneliness. There is millions of words, isolation, solitude, and I'm not going to give you the full vocabulary today. But I'll just give you 3 very brief definitions that in psychology we tend to use it. Bear in mind that loneliness is a subject that has been present in the literature, in human understanding knowledge since the human being started to think, probably. So the literature is immense. Psychology is a little bit limited in that, but still huge. We have emotional loneliness when there is the absence of meaningful relationship, social loneliness when we perceive a deficit in the quality of social connection, existential loneliness, that is this feeling of a fundamental separateness from others and from the world. I want to start with what we said, the existential loneliness. That is probably a universal, actually it is a universal experience that all of us has experienced. Probably the first time you experience that is the moment in which you're born. In a sense, the moment in which you are physically separated from your mom before you were the same body. You know, when you are born, yeah, there is the start of this perception that there is something new and I need to make sense. My job started more than 20 years ago in neonatology. So for me, it was beautiful starting observing these first experience of loneliness in babies. At that time, 20 years ago in Italy, was legal that a mom could decide to leave her baby in the hospital, abandon the baby in the hospital anonymously. So a healthy child, most of the time, was left there in a busy ward with a lot of ill children, waiting that the bureaucracy machine was starting. The child will start to cry, clearly to attract attention, feeling hungry, feeling a sensation, and say, come on, someone has to sort it out. Someone has to understand what it is. Give me a name. Give me a response. But the ward was very busy most of the time. So the answer was often very delayed, was done by different people. So the child didn't have someone ready to start the work of meaning. And when I say the work of meaning is, I got this sensation. I don't have a clue what it is. I'm just bored. And I have the need of someone that comes and recognizes what it is. Tells me, oh, this is hunger. Drink this. Do you feel better now? So, and this is the process of meaning. Learning about your own body, but learning also about the world. There was someone ready there to do that 24 hours a day. There were just nurses that on their time were given food and clean, you know. Sadly, you could observe that the children very soon started to reduce the intensity and the frequency of their cry. What is the point to cry? To let people know that I need if nobody is there. So the only option for the child was stop feeling. If nobody responds, there is no meaning in this feeling. The anger was there, the cold, the need of a cuddle was there, but you have to stop it because nobody gave you an answer. So maybe the question is wrong. And that's where the pathologies start, when your need is there, but there isn't an answer. There isn't someone give you an answer. But it's not tragic. We sorted out a voluntary association that literally had the aim to provide a cuddle, a smile, a little lullaby. There was all pool of young and old lady going there to do that job, day and night, just really to start to say, no, you're not alone. Your life is worth, your life is good, all your sensations have a meaning, they have a sense, and you are discovering that, not alone. That is from the baby. But then I had to move from teenagers that are probably less cute, but as well, incredibly able to elicit strong emotion. And if we have to think an important transition in life, transition from childhood to adulthood is the transition in life. Erickson, that is a famous psychologist, told us that through infancy and childhood, a person forms many identification, but the need for identity in youth is not met by these. So when you move from being a teenager to be an adult, you start the experience of the limit. There is something lacking. Suddenly you'd realize that mom and dad are not enough. You know, even your friends or your actual situation is not enough. There is this massive desire to understand who you are. What is your purpose in life? What is your place in the world? And this is, again, the same work, the work of meaning. Often in psychology, we call it the existential work. So there's need to build your own identity. And it's a very painful work that is absolutely necessary and vital. And that's why for us adults, that we have a kind of a well-defined definition, we find them quite hard to cope because they poke us to say, is it really sure that your definition is the right one? You know, at the basic level, at the start of this process to find their own identity, there is this loneliness. The relationship that before was everything suddenly is not. There is an emptiness that I need to feel. And but this process cannot happen alone. It's not find my own identity. It's not a thinking process. It's a relational process. In fact, identity is the gift that relationships give to you. So if you miss relationship in adolescence and when you are a young adult, you miss the opportunity to make sense and discover who you are and to discover the world. And that is a very painful question for us from what Martin just said. What is the contribution of older generation towards this endemic loneliness from the young people? Did we miss to give a meaningful relationship to them? I just want to pass now to from this existential loneliness that is the engine to find our identity, how and when it became a pathology. The answer is, I mean, if you reflect on what I mentioned to you about the baby, you can find out, but certainly when in this process, when I need to find a meaning, I need to find my identity, on the other side, what I receive is rejection, abandonment, criticism, confront, pain, humiliation, and neglect. So when these are the responses that I have, the first things that I do, I just need to protect myself. I mean, first I get scared and then I need to protect myself. And that stops this need to go towards a relationship, to build and maintain a relationship. So pathology starts when fear, and we will see in a moment also hopelessness, interfere with my need to be loved and to love. In 2017, Vivek Murthy, at that time he was the Surgeon General of USA, said, our society is an essential crossroad between love and fear. And I would say 5 years later, that is even more true. And in fact, the problem is when fear creeps between our relationship, okay, we stop to hope that something good comes from a relationship. So we stop to ask, you know, and we have to learn to live in loneliness. It's really a process. Interesting enough, what I found is that loneliness is something that we learn. We learn to live alone, not alone in a sense in isolation, but there's with this perception, I cannot trust that person. You know, ultimately it's me that I need to contain and control. But that changed the brain, changed massively the brain. In fact, there are a lot of literature about how our brain is affected. And what we see is hypervigilance, cognitive distortion, like, it's fine to be friend, but keep your distance. You never know, that person can make something. There is a general reduction in understanding the others, because I got my own, cognitive distortion. So whatever the other person is going to do, I will have the wrong interpretation. And then we call it the ideological fossilization on the position, because I cannot trust people. I have to trust something. That could be an ideology, it could be a recipe. That is something very abstract and most of the time quite violent. But also what I tend is to become very risk adverse. And if we think, I'm sure all of you has every day have to do millions of risk plan, risk assessment, where we need to making sure that everything is absolutely under control, because we cannot trust anybody, ourselves or the others. So that's clearly is not knowledge, is not openness. And we spend most of our energy just to control ourselves, the amount of referral that we have for emotional dysregulation, and the intervention about we need to learn to control the emotions is, quite hard to cope, I have to say sometimes. So learning to control ourselves as well as often having to control the others, So this is a very strong battle that we do every time, that we lose all the time because we don't have any power in that sense, certainly on our emotion and on the other people's behavior. That sometimes we take a shortcut, maybe we can sedate this fear and the battle to control everything with the shortcut like alcohol, drugs, certain use of media, or worse, the use of the other people. Clearly, sorry, I know that I've generated quite a lack of hope right now. But yes, definitely. So fear and the lack of hope, not expecting anything good from the others from the time. This is really where the pathology sits, okay? I have to say often, I worked every day with young people that use self-harm and try to commit suicide. And often they tell me, Gio, but I need to do this because everything is too much, too scary, too useless. And I need to feel something to realize that I'm still alive and the world exists. So the experience of the pain is ultimately a possibility, ultimately as a very strong cry to see, I need something, And that is where the hope we start, the hope for, as a clinician, to say, hopelessness and loneliness are not for you, are not normal. They are an illness. Having to cut yourself every day because otherwise you don't feel anything. You're completely swamped in this numbness. That is not normal. You deserve much more. And that's where the therapies start. But it's where every relationship can start. Again, every of us, and that we will talk about relationship in hope in a moment, is like one of the ladies in the association in the neonatology, that you can always go and offer your relationship as a hope, as a way to say, no, you're not alone. That pain is not meaningless. You can restart.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I think that hopefully I'm going to flow on a little bit from where Gio's kind of left us. Sometimes moving from despair to a situation that's more preferable involves kind of getting to grips with and tackling our situation. And I think over the next few minutes, I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about how we go about breaking down these stories of loneliness and how we understand them at a more personal level. Perhaps we might also reflect on your personal relationships with loneliness. I consider myself very, very lucky to have both trained as a psychiatrist, but also as a systemic therapist. In the world of psychiatry, we are largely considering illnesses within brains, and brains as sitting within bodies. In systemic therapy, we're far more thinking of humanity along the lines of how Desmond Tutu talks about we are only human because we are connected. The space between us, what goes on in communication, is far more important than just our own individual internal worlds. And to my mind, the combination of the two could be quite useful. I also hope that my slightly small conversation about personal relationships with loneliness sits okay in terms of the kind of the bigger stories that we've heard this weekend about entire globes worth of systems. My system at work is usually a young person and their connections, or a family of 3 or 4 people. And I think the other thing I wanted to do as part of an introduction, can someone at the back just wave at me if I start to go too quiet? With the woman in the glasses kind of do this. Where was I? The thinking of the balance between theory and then also what do we do? Maturana talks about the domain of explanation, which is largely to do with theory, but he also talks about domains of production and aesthetics. How do we get things done, and how do we do them gracefully, beautifully, and therapeutically? I wondered whether it might be useful to think about how we might talk about loneliness in our clinic, and whether that gives us all ideas about how we might talk about loneliness in whatever your community might be, whether that's with your family or peers or friends or in a relationship. I've got 2 main bits that came to my mind. One was being thoughtful of culture and the context. The other was being thoughtful of how just being curious about things unlocks connections and stories that we perhaps haven't heard before. So in terms of culture, we've heard a lot, I think, this weekend about Western industrialized ideas that are production orientated and our kind of caution about them. We've also heard about ideas from the global South that maybe are more entwined with personal connection. And I think there was a lot of nods in the room yesterday when ideas like that were thought about. Alongside this, we can see thoughts about loneliness in everyday culture. I don't know if we have any White Lotus watchers in the room. A couple. The White Lotus series on television is not so much driven by the characters. It's more to do with the connection between the characters and the lack of connection and loneliness, even though they are all in this luxury hotel. One of the characters is even reading a book called The Lonely City. So I'm sure it's not coincidence that there's that focus within that show. The other aspect of culture that I wanted you to reflect on, perhaps personally, is how your social characteristics intersect with these bigger kind of cultural ideas. Do you think, for example, that your gender might influence the opportunities or the style with which you can connect or not connect with other people? Are there things that you can say as a woman that you can't say as a man? Also, things like race and religion. How does religion connect us with certain ideas and people? What does it keep us away from, and what does it make it more difficult to talk about? We thought about age and how age influences loneliness and experiences of loneliness. And as well, things like class, education, sexuality, they all have an influence on the network that we're able to make. I wonder which of those characteristics you might personally attune to. Which has the biggest influence on your network of friends and friendships? I suppose the second part is that I've met many different types of loneliness in my work, and very few of them are exactly the same. So we might think about questions that unlock people's personal experiences of loneliness. I worked, for example, with a young person who said, "Do you know what, Alec? My perfect school would be a shed, and it would be at the top of the games field. And they would just come and drop my books off, and I wouldn't have to see anyone." We had to think, I suppose, about how we explored that idea a little bit more richly. And I think we did that through asking questions like, where and when might you experience loneliness? Where might you experience disconnection? Are they always at times when you're on your own, or are they when there might be people around you? When that wall or blanket or mist of loneliness is around you, what thoughts and feelings are you experiencing at a time like that? What connections are you making? What impact does loneliness have on your ability to be motivated, to reach out to people, to accept it when other people try to connect with you, perhaps? And what other ideas or expectations might make loneliness more powerful in your life? And finally, what people, ideas, or places can help to reduce your feelings of loneliness? Can you think of people in your past or your present? Can you think of people in fact or fiction who act as an inspiration to work against loneliness? I guess it's using questions like that that we try to unpick the banner of loneliness and see how it might relate to a particular person at a particular point in their particular life. And when we discussed that more with the girl in the shed, she said, I didn't think I was lonely because I had my books. But maybe it was a kind of a safe loneliness, Alec. Maybe that loneliness was kind of protecting me, but it was also meaning that I couldn't feel kind of satisfied and fulfilled with the other parts of my life that I wanted to connect with. So I guess by doing that, we were able to help her start to understand the things that were making it difficult for her to reach out and identify ways that she might begin to do that. So I hope it's useful for you to hear some of the ways that we might think about that in one-to-one work, as well as in, do you know what I mean, bigger transnational ideas of loneliness. For me, it helps to move beyond simple ideas of using the technology of medication to solve loneliness towards ideas about how we use technologies of conversation, how we use ideas of connection to tackle kind of local loneliness.
Thank you. You quoting Desmond Tutu, if I'm correct, we are human beings because we connect. And what came to my mind is Donald Winnicott, whom you may not have heard or come across. He was a British psychoanalyst whom used to do radio talks on BBC many, many years ago. And he helped a lot families, mums and babies, dads and babies and children. And one thing that he used to say that for us, for my field of study, is that there is no such a thing as a baby, but as a mum and a baby. And you know, your quote from Desmond Tutu sort of made me remember that, because I think we are in relation to another, which then brings me to ask my second question, which is related to you yourselves as human being in contact with another in this setting, in the setting of psychotherapeutic setting. So the therapeutic relationship offers a chance to reconnect with others and to recognize the need for dependence and attachment. And I'm thinking about the world today. We push so much our children to become independent from a very early age. I work with moms that, some of them want the baby to be able to sleep by themselves and not cry through the night. And wouldn't it be wonderful if that was possible? But it's not. So I'm just thinking here about, from this point of view of yourselves as therapists, do you experience loneliness within the therapeutic intervention? What is loneliness in the therapeutic intervention that you experience, or you may experience? How can the individualistic aspect of mental illness, along with certain therapeutic approaches, serve as a way to confront loneliness? And last but not least, in therapy, the source of hope that we aim to give, can it disappoint? Can it not disappoint? Tell me a little bit about it.
Thank you very, very much. The beauty of multiple questions like that is that it gives you some flexibility. I guess because a large part of my job is about trying to make things better, I want to focus for 5 minutes on some of the things that systemic therapy has kind of, I suppose, donated to me in order to have conversations and I think make changes, make better connections. And I'm sharing them with you in the hope that they extend beyond the therapy room. I think that idea of the need to be part of an active resistance against things that prevent people having the lives they want is a big part of the idea of systemic therapy. And that's, I guess, why some of this is a bit of a, could we try this? What do you think? And again, a lot of it is about connection, how we connect locally with the people who are within our sphere of influence. I once worked with a young person, and as we were coming out of COVID, we had been doing a lot of work on Teams and on the internet. And I asked this girl how her therapy had gone. And she said, yeah, it was all right, Alec, but I don't even know what shoes my therapist was wearing. And there was a real sense that she wanted a deeper, more human kind of connection. I suppose number one, I've written down, remain alert to loneliness. I think sometimes it's one of those things that can wheedle their way into our lives. Bits of our connections get kind of chopped away little by little. Number two, make the most of opportunities to meet, join, and connect. A lot of which in our work is about teaching people about listening. We often talk about the practice of generous listening. This is listening for the other person rather than listening for yourself. It's listening in order to be focused and mindful and attuned in that moment. The other one is radical listening. And that is listening with the idea of understanding the other person's context. Trying deeply to understand why they are saying what they're saying within the context of their world and their beliefs. Talk about relationships. we spend a lot of time asking, how are you? We probably spend less time asking, how are we? How are we getting on? How are these questions helping with something we might ask in therapy? What can I do to improve our relationship? What can we do to develop trust? The next one is a biggie, I think, in the context of this conference. It is using ideas of reasonable hope. So Weingarten is the author, and she says that reasonable hope is something we do. It's not something that lands upon us. It's not a feeling. It's an action and a practice, and we can do it. Reasonable hope implies that the future is open, uncertain, but it can be influenced in small ways. We have to accept that hope coexists with feelings of despair and that there is a contradiction. Hope often doesn't fly in and make everything better. Hope acts in continuity with difficulty. Finally, reasonable hope kind of links into practices and actions that move us towards our goals in small ways. And it moves us in directions that are tuned to our values. Even when there is very little hope, we might think, what are our values? And how can we try to act in accordance with them to create hope? Two more bits before I finish. One is about engaging in activities of hope. There's the incredible exhibition about awe and wonder. And again, Weingarten suggests you try and find a daily practice that involves wonder, whether that is prayer, whether it is the arts, whether it's music. Try and find a small moment in your day for that. I think the other things would be about looking at patterns of communication, reviewing the scripts that we are given, often by our families, about how to communicate, and thinking whether we want to accept those scripts that we've been donated or whether we want to rewrite them a little bit. Do we want to repeat the connection and communication styles of our parents, or do we want to tweak them in the modern world? And then finally, celebrating connection, acting as witnesses, amplifying the beauty of events like this. When we do see moments where people are attuned, how can we highlight that both to them and to our wider community? So as a quick summary, loneliness for me is best thought of in terms of connection and communication. It happens in the space between people rather than in the individual brain. And I think we can explore the different types of loneliness, but we can certainly use reasonable hope to create dialogues and find tools that reduce loneliness, both for ourselves and the people around us. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to try and speak so that Maria doesn't come forward again. It's quite scary when that happens. We've all seen those videos where, you know, people kind of lose it at lectures and attack the speaker. Thank you. I mean, again, it's one of the nice experiences being on a panel is just getting to listen to the other panelists. When you read about loneliness in clinical settings, you come across two utterly opposed positions. That's loneliness as an unavoidable human experience versus loneliness as a pathology. And I mean, this is another example of the, our kind of the human paradox. Analyzing our situation, our predicament, we're able to come up with two completely opposing theories, that explain it. I'm just mentioning this man, James Hillman, because I was really grateful to him at a period in my training. I'm a psychiatrist and he's a Jungian analyst, so we're completely different animals, if you like. But he wrote a book called "We've Had 100 Years of Therapy and the World is Getting Worse." And I was so grateful to him for some of the realism in what he's. It was a dialogue between him and a journalist. They're in Los Angeles or somewhere like that. But I was really grateful for the realism. Because in our world of psychiatry and therapy, you do read a kind of a positivism that we're getting there, we're just at the point of making the big breakthrough. And when the big breakthrough happens, wow, it's going to be amazing. And you read that all the time. And every time I read research, they just say, this is good, but we're just on the point of making the big, And anyway, I've always been highly skeptical of those just on the point articles. But I do like to remind audiences, and it's a kind of it is a lament, but I think it's a true lament, just of the direction of travel in my clinical lifetime, and what has happened over the last 2 or 3 clinical generations. Because when I was being trained by people who worked in child psychiatry in the 50s and 60s, they told me that in the 50s and 60s, which was actually a period of much better social cohesion, for instance, that self-harm and threats of suicide were much less dominant themes in the work that child psychiatrists did. I mean, they did other work, but those weren't so dominant themes. And I'm just interested that has been the direction of travel in our society. And maybe that's something to do with meta-narratives, and you do see this. I mean, you do see young people who are clearly swimming in a different sea to the one that I swam in when I was their age, and the influences on them. And whenever you open well, I don't know if you open newspapers anymore, but whenever you get our news feed from wherever you get it, our news people are just preoccupied with the negative, the various themes: economic peril, climate change. Not saying that these things are not important, the threat of nuclear war, but there's a constant sense of doom, in a way, or impending doom being discussed about, which has to be affecting people. As Joe was saying earlier, the work with at-risk children and young people is challenging. There's a US psychiatrist, John Meeks, who describes our therapeutic work as building a fragile alliance. And I really like that phrase, because there is a fragility about the work. 2 human beings, or in your case, a group of human beings getting together to talk about a situation. It's fragile. And in multicultural contexts that we work in, you have a sense that there's, to some extent, a stronger potential fragility, because there's more room for misunderstanding, if you like. In terms of the loneliness of the clinician, it can have several sources. I mean, first of all, casework has a regular sense of walking a tightrope. I work in a pediatric hospital where we get many hundreds of new referrals every year of young people who are in crisis. And the children and adolescents that we meet, they can be immature, they can be reactive and impulsive. And when we meet them, they're not in a good space. And what I often have to remind myself is that they and their parents are probably having the worst day of their lives. And so I have to remind myself that that's where they are. And these young people are living through a wound, sometimes a recent wound, sometimes a more distant wound, but they don't have a personal experience of recovery usually. They haven't actually understood yet that you can recover. There is potentially sunshine awaiting them in their lives. They haven't yet had that experience, often because they're young. So again, the clinician has to hold them and help to hold them for a period until recovery is possible. The loneliness of the clinician can be exacerbated by a risk management culture, which is a huge part of, necessary part of health services, but one can often experience risk management processes as being reactive rather than creative, so that there's a reaction after an event or a fact, sometimes when something serious has happened, but the same processes don't seem to be able to respond before the fact, when there are clearly substandard arrangements and things are being tolerated or ignored. And the other thing, I think one of the other things that's really pressing is to do with just caseload pressure. The fact that good casework takes time, and as societal distress increases and more cases emerge, there seems to be less and less time to help. And clinicians then try to respond with efficiency measures, and we can run ourselves ragged trying to become more efficient. But we reach a point when waiting lists become inevitable, and as these waiting lists lengthen, then the community begins to get despondent and begins to say that CAM services, for instance, are useless. So just returning then to hope and how to communicate hope in our work. I think our work is really precious. I mean, I would like to think that there's somebody here in the audience who might become a psychiatrist or a psychologist, because it's a fantastic work. It's a very privileged space, and I'm a doctor, I feel that my work is very different to the work of other doctors, because there's something different about talking about your life as opposed to, your kidneys or your bones or your skin. There's a kind of a mystery to the life as a whole concept, and because living your life as a whole requires a work to improve our understanding of self. And I think that's what's really fascinating about this work and about life itself. An understanding of human hope, desire, and disappointment, thankfully, cannot be reduced to a consideration of the biochemistry of neurotransmitters, although there are many people who think that it can, but I'm very confident that it cannot. In terms of just a personal story, in 2009, I don't know if I'm at 62 years of age, I can't actually remember what I said last year, so if this is the same as what I said, you can boo or something, but I attended a conference in Hawaii in 2009, which was great, but I was really intrigued by the Pacific peoples that I met there. They were so different to people that I'd met before, and then I found myself eventually bringing my family to live in New Zealand, and to be the lead of a CAM service there, which had many Maori families. And anyway, you can imagine, I was quite daunted on my first day. My first patient arrived in. She was a 14-year-old girl who had lost her grandmother, and she came to the consultation with 3 generations of her family, and they all came in a pickup truck, and they were all wearing Wellingtons. So this was different. You imagine I've worked in Guy's Hospital in London, so I don't remember pickup trucks, and I don't remember Wellingtons. So it was different. But I find myself amazed as we spoke together. I find myself amazed at being able to draw on commonalities. So little things in my life that like a knowledge of sheep from Donegal, an experience of wakes, that allowed me to kind of enter into her world, because the wake and the funeral in Maori culture is extremely important, central building block of their community. So I could feel that fragile alliance being constructed, you know, when we were together. And that kind of alliance, as Alec was saying, is needed to grow an experience of hope in our common culture. So we need to focus on what links us to the other, what holds us together. And it's a work when we do that. We have to find a common humanity that transcends the barriers that we encounter, cultural, generational, etc., racial, sexual, etc., etc. The list is endless. Now, this is where it gets interesting in a way, but for a hope that doesn't disappoint, it has to be it must be transcendent, okay? So it must have strong roots which no storm of life can uproot. There must be a peace and joy which gives strength to overcome all tribulations. Now, you may recognize that the language that I've just used has come, is ancient in our culture. And it's still heard today. This is what those words were the words that Pope Francis used at Camarino in Italy after an earthquake in 2019. So I think for transcendence, we have to go, you know, that's something we have to consider as a culture. So in closing, I just want to pay tribute to work that Nick Cave, the singer, is doing with a Red Hand Files platform. Now I know his music a little bit. I have to be honest, I'm not a fan, but I really like what he's doing with this platform. So he allows people to share stories about grief and loss. And he personally knows a thing or two about grief and loss because he has lost 2 of his sons to premature death. And what's really interesting about him is just what he says about grief, which is just not heard a lot in our world. He talks about the joy that follows grief, that's linked to grief, and that would not have been experienced without a broken heart.
Thank you, Martin and Alec. For me, when I was trying to reflect about my own loneliness in therapeutic work, I couldn't find a better suggestion than from St. Augustine in the Confession. He said, through solitude, loneliness is always inhabited and teach us to leave our relationship. And clearly for him, this solitude was a place where he could rediscover the encounter that gave him meaning, sense, and ultimately hope. And I think that is exactly what I need to do every time I go in session, to think about who is in my loneliness, and in particular to avoid to feel my own loneliness, but worse, the loneliness of my young people with things that are quite meaningless. I have to say there is a full industry try to do that with the publicity, media, you know, ideology. For me, where I need to stay with my own loneliness and do memory, who inhabit my own loneliness, but more than anything, I need to stay with the loneliness of our young people, of my young people. Sometimes it's very hard because often they come, they're very distressed, angry. They don't have why they should hope in a complete stranger. The other day I had a young lady that came, a very, very difficult situation. And I had my simple question, how are you? Fine. And I asked another question, have you done anything this week? Fine. And the temptation was, well, if you behave like that, why are you here? You know, clearly you don't want to be here. That was my, right hemisphere. But then there was something said, yeah, but that is the most precious thing that she can give it to you. And because I knew it, that I was probably not particularly different from her, you know, and someone gave me patient hope. I said, right, I can start with this, fine. And I start to play with that, and I'm not joking. I told to some of you, I start to say, right, okay, maybe we can develop a new language. If you say fine once, it's yes. If you say fine, it's no. She wanted to challenge me. And believe me, do 30 minutes with fine. Yeah, it was incredible, hard, but every time I have to go back to my own loneliness. Gio, you've been loved. Before being able to speak, before being able to reach a girl, you have to love her. How it is now. After half an hour, she said a sentence. Can I go home now? But she said a sentence. But when she was at the door, she turned and she said, if you want, I can do the questionnaire, because I always offer a questionnaire. She refused to do that questionnaire for the previous 4 sessions. She did it there. And I thought, yes, this is my job. Inhabit my own loneliness, her loneliness. Stay with her in what she can give me before she change, before she feel what I'm expecting in the therapy. And that is what is therapy. Give hope. Therapy is constantly an act of hope. You do not start therapy, probably you don't start anything if you don't have hope. If you are not certain that there is a possibility for you. And I have to say, the scientific bit of the part that I love, by the way, don't get me wrong, but it's a bit depressing sometimes. The outcome of our therapeutic intervention normally on a positive average is around 70%. At the second presentation of the second episode of depression, get much lower. But despite that, our job is to give hope. Psychology only started 25 years ago to study what this hope is. It's a fundamental ingredient in our job, but we don't know much about it. I have to say, the definition that I found it, and they're nice, don't get me wrong, but there is a Sneeder that says that it's a cognitive trait that helps us to identify goals and to pursue that. Then we have Gallagher that said, hope is about embracing possibility. But I'm a bit disobedient, as you probably noticed, and I thought, but there is a missing part. You cannot have hope by yourself. It's just stay for a second. The best definition that I found about hope is not even a definition, is a literature and an image. One is Biggie that describe hope as a little girl. A little girls that do something, as Alex said, because hope is doing something. But something very simple. A little girls that go to school. She does a walk, but in this walk, she gives the direction to 2 older women that have faith and charity. And as you say, Martin, I think there is something transcendent about hope. But then the other one is Gaudí. Yesterday we had a picture of the Sagrada Familia. Have a look to the door of hope. The door of hope is a boy, probably 5 or 6, at the top of a footstool, very concentrated on his dad, that probably is there, that is teaching him, telling him how to become a carpenter. In fact, on the floor there is all the tools of the carpenter. So 2 little children that actually give us the direction. And I think that is what hope in my life, something little, but it's there, that give me the direction. That is something that I got since I was little, And all the faces, the encounter, that always remind me my value, that loved me before I changed, before even I was able to reach any sort of goals. And I think in therapy, hope is really a bridge or a little light that you bring in the darkness of the illness. Ultimately, hope is someone that comes and stays with you in your loneliness, in your misery, in your limits, and he's not afraid of that. But when someone look at that, at your nothingness, certain that there is something good, you can start again to look at yourself as something good. So, I am learning, and that is beautiful because I never thought that getting older and grumpy, but still, I'm learning that hope is, I'm learning that hope opens us to unthinkable horizon. And this reminds what this year we're celebrating the Jubilee, that the Pope tell us to, and wish us to be able to discern anywhere a sign of hope, the eruption of the possible into the impossible. And I thought that is what I want for my therapeutic work, the eruption of a possible good, a possible light into the darkness of mental illness. My day is really, every day, my job, I am called to recognize hope and to do memory of the origin of my hope. And I'm learning to discover hope in places, in people where apparently there were no hope. And hope, as well, we said before, fear and loneliness, actually hope as well change our brain, reshape our brain, but in a completely different direction than what fear and loneliness does. It promotes us agency. It promotes us openness, ability to welcome the other's reality, to promote the openness to the reality, but also to the creativity. And again, we have to relearn every day to live in hope. And I think that is a clear question, what are you learning? Are you learning to live in hope or in fear? I just finish now to give you a task, because when we do therapy at the end, there is always a task that you need to do it, okay? That is exactly what I said before. Try to discern everywhere sign of hope, to see the eruption of the possible into the impossible. And I think even changing this gaze, doing this task, you will recognize that there is much more hope and good around us than what others want us to believe.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I know that we have a space for one question, so if you ask it well. There is one there. Yeah, one there. Maybe two for a quick one. Quick answer.
No, it's green. Okay, apologies. Sorry. So, America, first of all, thank you so very much. It was really inspiring. I have the pleasure, the fortune, as you said, to work with children with cancer. So I'm a doctor as well. And I think that when you treat a child, so I was struck by what Alex said, the fact of the system. So actually we deal with the family, not with the child only. And my question is, of course, some families and some children don't do well, other they can heal over time. But my question is that how we, as lucky people that have been blessed with faith, how we can try to approach colleagues that maybe they don't see the need for an holistic approach, I would say, quoting Cicely Saunders, I think that, there is different aspects of, as you were saying, different types of loneliness, different types of pain, and how we can, in a very, I would say, humble way, try to contribute to make sure that the child is also taking into account also loneliness, because we do have, unfortunately, we do also have teenagers, right, that beyond the cancer, they also have the issues. Or so yeah, I just want to ask you maybe your relationship with colleagues and how you can, not impose anything, but try to show a different way potentially of hope, because not all of them, of course, they have had our path or whatever. So yeah, thanks.
I would wonder how that colleague might experience watching you talk with your patients about love, religion, and those other things that strengthen them. And whether you could then reflect with your colleague, what did you think about that? That would be one option.
Thanks.
Thank you for all what you've shared today. I wanted to talk about young adults and the role of the family in supporting those young adults, because you talk a lot about therapy. I'm sorry, because it's very emotional for me, but I wanted to understand if you had example of how the family, what is the role of the family in this context? You talked about you as a therapist, but I am not a therapist in front of someone like that. So I wanted to understand that better. Sorry.
Sorry, I don't know. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. I mean, the truth is that both questions are really challenging in the sense that there's, I mean, there might be a formula of words that I can give you that seems like the answer, but the truth is that it's about living. This is about living. This is about living with situations that we're kind of learning how to approach. It's the approach, it's a human approach to situations. That's what we're learning. And nobody at this table is necessarily a true expert in that. This is about learning a human approach to situations. One of the beautiful things about this particular project, this panel is that it gave me an opportunity to go to Chester and to spend time with Jo and her family and to meet Alec and Giselle there as well. And it's just that this business of living, it's made up of so many different things. It's how we cook meals, what we watch on TV, how we speak, how we treat the doorman, whatever it is. This is the business of living, and there's no there's no formula for that. But it's clear that the deeper we go in our relationship with our own life and with the others that we encounter, the more we communicate something really beautiful and something important. You know, I know, I'm just trying to remember who said this. There's surely a saint in the canon of Catholic saints, but it's about, in order to, if you like, live among others, I mean, in a certain sense, the last thing we need to use is words, okay? But our example is really important, it seems to me. The example. If we're living a truth or a beauty, that will spill out of us and affect the people around us. You know, it's inevitable. Now, in terms of just the question of living with difficult situations, I mean, I don't know. I'm going to look to Jo because she's a psychologist and I'm only a psychiatrist. But I would just say it's a daily. Some of these situations are a daily cross, and we have to get up every morning and face them again. You know, and sometimes it's about acceptance of. Sometimes there are things that we can do that help and change and produce a resolution, but sometimes there aren't. Sometimes we have to get up every morning and pick it up again, and you know, and then find what really helps us with that. You know, it would be each day the friendships that sustain us, the things that really help us. I'm sorry because I don't know your situation, really. It's, you know, these, you know, to some extent I'm talking in
Maybe there is an
generalities.
opportunity. Sorry to cut you because I keep seeing like there's an opportunity for you to come and maybe chat separately. So I would like to thank you, the audience, and I would like to thank the panel too for a lovely and thoughtful